Hello. In today's video, we're going to be demonstrating how to perform buffer analysis in Simple GIS Client. In addition, we'll be showing you some of the advanced analytical techniques that you can employ in your buffer analysis to glean the most information out of your data. The first demonstration will focus on straight line distance, or as may be referred to as the bird flies distance buffer analysis, which simply generates buffers in a fixed radial distance around selected features. So to begin with, I have a map with several data layers loaded. I really just have the Street Atlas data set loaded that comes with Simple GIS, but you could add your own data layers as well and perform the same analysis on them. For the first demonstration, I'm going to select this state capitals and very large cities shapefile layer that's loaded. And this is just a simple point shapefile that represents cities around the US. So I'm going to begin by making it my active layer, which it already is active. And you can always tell what your active layer is by looking in your table of contents, and whatever layer is shaded in the green indicates the active layer. So as you notice, as I click on other layers, as I click on these layers, you see the shading change, indicating that that is now the active layer. But again, the layer of interest for this particular demonstration is the state capitals and very large cities. So I'm going to make that my active layer. And then I'm going to use my select feature tool here on the second toolbar row. And as I click on this tool, again, it acts on whatever the active layer is on my table of contents. And so with this tool, I can just simply click and drag to draw a box around the point of interest. And as I do that, I'll notice the point changes color, indicating that this point is now selected, and the color is based upon the selection color that's set in your view properties setting. So to generate a buffer around this selected point, again, with the state capitals, my active layer, I'm going to go to the geoprocessing menu at the top of your application window. And as I click on this menu option, I'm going to go just 3 menu items down to the one that's called Perform Buffer Analysis around Features and Selected Layer. As I click on this menu item, you'll be presented with this dialog box. The very first screen is allowing you to just select what features you want to generate buffers around. You could generate buffers around selected graphics. So if I had just drawn some simple graphics in my map and had selected some, I could use that to generate buffers around. Or in this case, the option I'm going to use is around selected features of a layer. So once you choose your option, you just click the next button and you're brought to the next screen. In this particular screen, you have all of the layers in your current map listed. It defaults to the active layer in your current map, which was the one we had chose, the state capitals and very large cities. So I don't have to select it again. It's already selected by default, so that's good. And then if there was a unique ID field in your layer that uniquely identified each feature, you could use that field, which may help you in some of the graphs and all that will be presented to identify the features. Again, this is optional. You do not have to select this. And in this case, I'm just going to leave it unselected. And I'm going to go to the next specify buffer distance and intervals. This is where I set the parameters for the buffers I want to generate. The first parameter is the buffer resolution. This just governs how smoothly curves are generated in part of your buffers generation process. The higher this number, the smoother the curve, but it may have a longer processing time. The lower the number, of course, the curve is not as smooth, but it could speed up processing time. I find 48 is a pretty good value to use in that, and a compromise between the resolution and the processing time. The next parameter is the distance. Of course, the units for the distance is specified in this set of radio buttons beneath this text box. You can specify distance units as feet, miles, meters, or kilometers. And whatever radio button you selected, that's the units of measurement that the distance will be interpreted as. So you could just click on one of these radio buttons. I'm going to leave it set to miles. And then this parameter is where you would specify the radio distance. So I'm setting the distance as because I've used this in the past and I've used this particular, it goes to what my last setting was. In this case, it was a 1 mile distance. And I'm going to leave it set to that for this example. And then the third parameter that we can specify is the intervals. So this is how many intervals we want to generate in our buffers. So if it was set to 1, it would just generate a single buffer using the radial distance specified around the selected features. In this case, I have it set to 2, and what that means is it'll generate one buffer at a 1 mile radial distance, and then it'll generate a second buffer at a 2 mile radial distance. If this was set to 3, it would actually generate 3 buffers, one at a 1 mile radial, and one at a 2 mile radial distance, and then a third one at a 3 mile radial distance. You can also specify if you want to merge buffers. So in this case, if you had multiple features selected that you're generating buffers around and these buffers overlapped, this would merge any overlapping buffers. And if you are generating buffers around a polygon, you can elect whether you want it to generate the buffer just on the outside of the polygon, which is what it does if this is not checked. If this was checked, it would generate the buffer on the outside and on the interior of the polygon boundaries, which is kind of illustrated in this graphic here. Since this is a point feature, this really doesn't apply, so we don't have to worry with that. But I do want to draw your attention to some of the more sophisticated analysis you can do with this tool. And so for that purpose, I want to draw your attention to this second button on this particular screen, which says I want to calculate census demographic data or spatial analysis for my buffers. So if I click on this button, I'll be brought to this new screen. It has a couple of tabs at the top. One is for including demographic data, which Simple GIS has a built-in interface to the U.S. Census Bureau to use the American Community Survey 5-year data set to query for demographic data. And then there's another tab that's called Perform Spatial Analysis, which enables you to do more analysis using other data layers in your current map. You don't have to do either one of these, and you can do them independent of each other. But for this demonstration, I'm going to do them both. So I'm going to use the include demographic data. And in this list box is a set of predefined queries that Simple GIS has already predefined. Anything from education type demographics to housing statistics to income and population data. And then there's one called a default ring analysis, which contains a multitude of demographic data and is a combination of many of these. Of course, you don't have to use any of these pre-populated queries. You could define your own query by clicking on this Define New Query tab, and that is covered in other documentation in the program. But for this demonstration, I'm going to use the predefined query, and I'm just going to use a simple population. So I just want to calculate the total population within my buffers. Now, a couple of options you have. One is to aggregate interval data, which means that for any interval buffers, so as you go out in different rings, so again, in this scenario, we had 2 intervals, a 1 mile and 2 mile. That indicates that the exterior rings is inclusive of all the data in the interior rings. Versus if this was unchecked, then the data in the exterior rings would be exclusive of the data in the interior rings. So for example, in this case, I have 2 intervals. I have a buffer generated at 1 mile and another buffer generated at a 2 mile radial distance. With this checkbox checked, the exterior ring, which is the buffer at the 2 mile radial distance, will approximate the population for the entirety of all area covered within that 2-mile buffer. If this was unchecked, then it would exclude the approximated population within the 1-mile interval buffer so that the values calculated or generated would be the approximate population that lies between 1 mile and 2 miles from the selected feature. In addition, you can also include historical demographic data by checking this box. So you can include a 5-year historical snapshot of your data by checking this box. And then also, if you wanted to try to approximate the demographic data into a future year, you can select the year from this drop down. I'm not going to do it at this point, but if you did select a future year, that would essentially allow you, it would look at the historical 5-year data, and the program would attempt to do a linear regression analysis to try and determine or approximate what the demographic data might be in that future year. So again, this is the demographic analysis that we can do. And then the other type of analysis is to perform spatial analysis. So I'm going to click on this tab at this point. And this allows me to query other features in my map that might fall within those buffers. So for example, if you look at the label here, it says select all features of, and if I click on this drop down, this is all the different layers in my current map that I can use. So I'm going to select this points of interest layer. This points of interest is a simple point shapefile that represents points of interest such as restaurants, hotels, museums, schools, etc. And then I have an operation that I can elect to perform. So in this case, I have this one drop down to select the layer, and then I have this second drop down that allows me to select the operation. I can select to intersect buffers or completely contained within buffers. Since this is a point shapefile, this doesn't really make a difference. You're going to get the same result in either case. But if this, for example, was a polyline shapefile or a polygon shapefile, you could elect to only select features that intersect the buffers or only select features that are completely contained within the buffer. So I'm going to select completely contained within the buffer. Again, much like the demographic data, you can elect to aggregate interval data, which I'm going to leave that checked. But then the other thing you can do is group or classify your data that it's going to select from this layer. So in this example, I have an attribute field within this particular point shapefile that indicates the type of points of interest. So there are classes. For example, there's this attribute field that indicates whether a particular feature is associated with a food provider like a restaurant, or if it's a school, or if it's whatever, a museum, hotel, anything like that. So I'm actually want to use that to group the data by that field, and that field is called POI type. So I'm going to select that field, and then I can select what I want to summarize the data by. So these are all the available fields in this shapefile. Again, this is a simple shapefile, only has 2 fields, a name field and a POI type field. Both of these are string fields, so there's really limited operations you can do on this. But that's okay, because all I want to do is get a count of features by this POI type for all features that fall within the generated buffer. So in this case, I'm just going to select POI type, and as I select this field from the list of available fields, this drop-down becomes active, and I can select the operation for that, and I want to select the count operation. And now I need to give a field name for this new calculated field. So quite simply, I'm just going to call it count of POI. And then I'm going to use this button towards the bottom of the dialog that has the 2 arrows pointing over to the right towards the output fields to add this as an output field. and my results. And quite simply, this just tells you I want a new field, count of POI. The operation is a count of this attribute field. And now all I have to do is specify the output for my new buffer layer. So I click that next button, input a name for my new layer. I can specify an interior ring color. So this is a starting color for the most interior ring, and then an exterior ring color, which is the ending color for the most exterior ring. And so if I had any intermittent intervals, it would create a color gradient between the starting color and this ending color for those intermediate intervals. And then I can also specify an opacity for my symbol, which just governs the transparency. The lower this value, the more transparent the symbol. The higher the value, the more opaque the symbol is. So now all I have to do is click Create Buffers. It'll actually generate the buffers. It does that fairly quickly. And if I look in the lower left of my application window, I can get a status. So I see now it's processing census block data. And once it's completed, it'll zoom to the buffers, and then I'll be presented a set of graphs here to the right, graphing out the data that is selected. So the first graph is that count of points of interest. And if I hover over these bars, I can see the value that it calculated. So this is points of interest in the 1 mile buffer. It found 125 that was associated with food or restaurants. And then as I hover over these others, I see there's 13 hotels, etc. And if I click on any bar, it'll flash the buffer that graph is associated with. And of course, this is the 2 mile. And so, of course, it has a lot more features that fall within 2 miles. And again, this is broken down by all the different categories. As I move across the bars, it'll highlight which category it's looking at in the legend here. So this lists all the different categories we have for the points of interest. In addition, we have tabular data here below that gives you the tabular output. And as I scroll further down on this right side, I see I have another graph that is charting the population. And it's doing it by year because we had indicated that we wanted to include historical data. So we see we have 2019 data for the population all the way to 2023, which is the most current year. And of course, just like before, if I click on one of these bars, it flashes the particular buffer that it's associated with. And again, I also have the tabular data below. And then you can also view the attribute data itself within the layer. So there is actually a tool on the second toolbar. It's the third tool from the left. Then it's hover over it. It's called View Feature Data. And so if you select that tool, it allows you to click on a feature in the map, and it acts on whatever the current active layer is in your map, which is the output that we just generated, as I can tell by the green shading. And so if I was to click on one of these buffers using this View Attribute Data tool, I will get this nice pop-up that indicates the attribute data. This first couple of fields is just related. This is a feature ID field, which identifies the particular feature in the shapefile. Again, similar to this ID field as well, and this unique ID is just a generated field. And it's basically just a combination. It's the ID 0 with a dash, and then the interval or the distance. So in this case, 0-1, which is for the buffer distance of 1 mile. It gives you the current population. So that again, 2023 being the most current, and then the margin of error as well that comes from the American Community Survey. And then you get a couple of tables that has the breakdown of the data based on the analysis we selected. The first one is for the points of interest. So it gives you the POI type and then the number of features for that type. So I can see there was 2 fire stations, 125 related to food or restaurants, 3 fuel, historic 1, 3 hospitals, 13 hotels, etc. And then in the second table output is the population by year, so 2019 all the way through 2023. So that is doing the simple radial distance buffer. I do want to show one more illustration related to the straight line distance buffer. So let me remove this layer quickly. So I'm just going to right click on it and select remove layer to remove it from my map. So that demonstration was around selected point features. But again, you can generate buffers around polylines or polygons or any other type features. And to illustrate that, I'm going to select the motorways layer. And again, using the select features tool, I'm just going to drag a box to select some of these features for the motorways. And I can see that they did change color, indicating they're selected. And I want to go back to my geoprocessing, go to perform buffer analysis, and I'm going to do the same operation around those selected motorways just to show you how the buffers differ. So I have my motorways selected. Click next to specify my buffer parameters. I'm going to leave everything the same, set as before. And I'm going to go back to my demographic and spatial analysis, and I'll do the same type of analysis. Population total. And then I'll do points of interest, completely contained, and I want to group the features by POI type. I want to do a count of those features. Add that to my output. Go to next, specify, and I'll use the same name for my output layer. And I'm going to click create buffers. And in this case, since we had already created that layer, I'm just getting a confirmation to confirm that I actually want to overwrite that layer. So I'm going to select yes. And now it's going to generate those buffers. And now you see the buffers look a little bit different, elongated, because it's generating a buffer at a 1 mile radius around the selected polyline motorway features we had selected, and then wanted 2 miles. And then once it completes this calculation, of course, we get our graphs for the results using these new buffers now that's generated around these motorways. So that illustrates generating buffers using just a straight line radial distance, or as I said before, kind of as the bird flies distance. But you can also generate buffers using a drive time or drive distance analysis. And so what that looks at is around selected points. It looks at how far you can drive using the existing roadways in the given time interval or for a given distance in any direction. And so once again, I'm going to remove this layer. And you can actually invoke the drive time, drive distance analysis in a couple of different places. One is from the topmost toolbar, kind of close to the end of the toolbar, there's a tool button that if you hover over it says create drive time rings. Or you can also go back to the geoprocessing drop-down menu at the top of your application, and right beneath where we performed our buffer analysis before, there's another menu item called Perform Drive Time, Drive Distance Analysis. So you can click on this particular menu item, and now you'll get a slightly different dialog box that comes up. And so the first option is you need to select the points that you want to generate a drive time, drive distance around. Now, unlike the straight line buffer analysis, the drive time, drive distance analysis only works around points. So you can't select polylines or polygons. It has to have starting points that you want to use to perform the calculation around. And you can select these points. You can either manually enter the points by entering a street address or using this tool, which allows you to click a point on a map and add it. So that's what we'll do here. If we just click on this tool button And I'm just going to click on this point, kind of in the same location where the city's point was located at before. And when I click on the map, I see that it enters a latitude, longitude coordinate at this location or in this text box. And now I can click this plus button to add it to my list. And I can continue to add points if I want it to run analysis around multiple points. The other option I could do is I could use selected graphics, which if I had drawn simple graphics in my map that I had selected, I could just run the analysis around those selected graphics. Or likewise, around a layer in the map, I could select a particular layer and it would calculate around the selected features in those layers. But I'm going to stick with the manual list for now, since we already have this coordinate and it's entered. And now I'm going to go to my next button to specify my drive intervals. So if I've run the analysis in the past, it would default to whatever the last analysis I ran, so it would list those drive intervals. You can change these intervals, so I can select an interval if I wanted to remove it from the list. I can just click on the interval and click on this button here to remove it from the list. Likewise, I can add intervals by clicking on this top button. As I click on this button, I get an input box to input a particular interval I want to use. So I'm going to do the same type of analysis. And here underneath this list, I can specify the unit type for the interval. So I can specify that I want to run this based on travel time, which this is specified in minutes. So if I selected this option, what the program will do is interpret this as everything within 1 minute drive time of the selected point or 2 minutes drive time. Or I can do it based on distance, which is then interprets it as miles. So in this case, I want to calculate buffers for everything that can be driven to within 1 mile from the selected point and 2 miles. And then very much like the straight line buffer analysis, I can come to this option that says I want to calculate census demographic data or spatial analysis for your buffers. And if I click that option, I get a dialog box very, very similar to what we had in the other buffer analysis tool, where I can include demographic data. So once again, I want to do population, I want to aggregate it, and I want to include historical data. And then I can also perform spatial analysis as well. So if I click this tab, again, I'm going to select my points of interest layer, and I want all features that are completely contained within the buffers. I want to aggregate interval results, and I want to group or classify the data by the POI type. And then I just want to count of those features. And now I'll specify the output for my new buffer, and I'm just going to use the same layer name again. So it's going to prompt me again confirming, do I want to overwrite that layer, the existing layer? I'm going to say yes. And now it's doing its calculation. And in this case, at the bottom of this dialog box, I'm getting a status update. And then once it's complete, just like before, it'll zoom to those buffers and present the results here in graphs to the right. And in this case, you see instead of just the perfect circle buffer that was generated on the straight line analysis, this is more, like a polygon shape that indicates the various ways that you can drive that's located within 1 mile of the selected point. The same thing here on the outer ring is everything within 2 miles driving distance from the selected point. Just like before, I can use the View Feature Data tool to click on any of these generated polygons to get the attribute data for that particular buffer as well. So hopefully this has been helpful to illustrate how you can perform this buffer analysis in Simple GIS. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. You can visit our website. That website is simplegissoftware.com. It's all one word. And there's actually a contact us page on that website. We'd love to hear from you if you have any questions. Thank you.